Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Speaking of the union, Jay, they helped us select this episode. We started with a list of possible roundtable subjects that got whittled down by our board of directors. Then we put it out to the patron community to vote for an Origins episode, but instead of doing an Origins episode like we've done in the past, where we take a 2000s band that started in the 90s, we decided to take a 90s band that was successful and go back to their 80s origins when they were less known. And the three picks were Dinosaur Jr., Sonic Youth, and our winner, Soundgarden. So Jay, have you heard of this band called Soundgarden?
Soundgarden? Yes. And I think we could also call this episode Soundgarden in the 80s.
Yes. This episode is officially titled Soundgarden in the 80s so that we tap into both the Soundgarden fan base and people who are fans of 80s music. It's a synergetic title right there. So we have a whole bunch of folks who want to talk about Soundgarden in the 80s. They're really into the Fop dub remix, and they want to share their love of that. We're about to have battling CD displays once Johnny Hooper's video connects here.
Oh man.
Him and Kyle Bittner have got two of the more impressive CD racks that we've seen. So going around, there he is. Oh, and he went the extra mile of putting up the Badmotorfinger vinyl release on his display section.
Special edition, baby.
There you go.
It's so shiny.
Yeah.
It is.
Hold on.
Let's see. Make it spin.
Yeah, let's make it spin.
For those listening at home, this is not entertaining.
No.
But for those who are watching the video feed, which you get to see at Patreon, because we're making amazing television here.
There it is.
He just launched the album cover, which now has turned into a very deadly blade, akin to a circular saw. And you can actually use this album to cut wood.
You are getting very sleepy now.
You are a cheeseburger.
So let's welcome the folks, some who have been here before, some who have not. Welcoming back Mr. Phil Fleming. Welcome, Phil.
Hello.
Rudy Stowell. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Johnny Hooper. Welcome back.
Cheers, boys.
Sean Brown for the first time joining us.
Hey, everybody.
And Kyle Bittner. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Between the two of you, I think you have all the CDs.
Oh, yeah.
That's an impressive collection of CDs between the two of you. I wonder if there's any overlap at all.
Hopefully they both own some Soundgarden CDs.
I would hope so.
There's always overlap.
So
I do not own that Nirvana box set that I see up there, though.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, tasty.
Don't forget about the In Utero.
Oh, look at
20th
that.
anniversary edition.
That's wicked, too. Nice.
So many pretty things.
So many. So let's go around the room. Everybody has an introduction point with this band that might be, slightly different. When they discovered them, when they first heard them, which video they saw on Headbangers Ball at a certain time. So let me start with you, Rudy. When did you first discover Soundgarden?
Back in the 80s, I'm a building contractor, and we were always listening to music on site. We'd trade tapes around, and the first tape I heard was Ultramega OK, Flower, which is still one of my favorite songs ever. I still listen to it when I work out. I mean, it's just one of the best songs ever. And, being here on the coast of California, they kind of came down through. They came right past us to go down and play in LA, and it was exciting. It reminded me of punk, when punk hit, and it was just so exciting and brand new and raw and just amazing music, and Soundgarden they remain my favorite band to this day.
Wow, so you were on early. That's cool. That's much later than me. Sean, what about you? When did you first discover Soundgarden?
I'm one of those little Seattle club kids. So I can with big confidence say, like, I was there at the Central Tavern as a 8th grade and freshman in high school. My big brother would take me, and we saw some of those shows. At that point, they were, fairly established. Certainly in Seattle, but they were just getting out there right around that time. I think that A&M record came out in '89, right?
Yeah.
So, but like, I was just one of those little kids. So it made a big impression, obviously, and it still rings true to this day.
How big were how big is that venue that you're talking about?
Oh,
Like, how many?
Friggin' tiny, like a bar. The Central Tavern is like one of those like now storied Seattle venues where everybody was playing. It's little teeny tiny that you probably couldn't get 200 people in there at the most.
Wow.
Yeah.
That had to be loud.
It was super crazy loud. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Phil, what about you? When did you first get hip to Soundgarden?
Well, being on the complete opposite coast as Sean, for me, it was seeing the Rusty Cage video on MTV. And I forget it. I forget if Outshined came before or after it, but yeah, it was the Rusty Cage video.
Mm-hmm.
But they really, really sold me when Super Unknown was released. At that point, it was just that big head of steam that was, between Badmotorfinger and the song on the single soundtrack. It was just built up to that, in which, everybody at that point had heard of Soundgarden by '94.
Right.
So, yeah. I was one of those mainstream ones.
Yeah,
but,
well, no, I don't think, I don't know about Jay, but it was Rusty Cage for me. I remember seeing the video for the first time, just being like, what is this? Like, I had not heard anything like that before. Jay, what about you? When you
Yeah,
discover them?
my memory was Outshined. I think that was the first single or the first video, because I remember obviously Nirvana was hitting big at the time. So my perception of like what alternative or grunge was going to be was in that mold. So when I saw Outshine, and I could immediately connect with how heavy it was, and it kind of, I was in tune from like my metal background to be able to like get into it, and also could kind of sense some of the, not only is him being like a very different singer than Kurt Cobain, but also just there was a polish or musicianship to it that really struck me. So Outshine for sure. And then I saw the video for Rusty Cage shortly after, and my head was twisted. Like, what is going on? How is this a song? Like, but yeah,
well, the jump cuts in that video certainly did not hurt.
Yeah.
Yes. But that riff is just so unorthodox than like anything I'd ever heard to that point. It was just kind of mind blowing.
Yeah. Kyle, what about you? Where's your entry point with Soundgarden?
So I was in high school when sort of Soundgarden started to make their name known around the Badmotorfinger time, and I think I remember hearing Heretic on the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack, and just being all over that song and loving it, and that soundtrack as a whole. And then, kind of like the rest of you, I started seeing Rusty Cage, Jesus Christ Pose on Much Music up here in Canada, and just being blown away by how amazing it really was, and how different it sounded from a lot of the other bands that were sort of around at that time. So,
and last, Mr. Hooper, when were you feeling Minnesota, so to speak?
This is obscure, so stay with me.
Okay.
In 1990, there's a film called Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton and Melanie Griffith.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew Modine as well. And in the film, Michael Keaton is like the tenant from hell, and he's tormenting poor Matthew Modine and Melanie Griffith to the point where Matthew Modine has been hideously injured and is laid up on a sofa for days on end. One of those days that he's on the sofa, he's watching MTV in his delusional state. He's watching the Hands All Over video from Soundgarden. And that was literally my entry point. I was so taken by the song that's being played in this obscure film. And that was my entry point into Soundgarden. 1990 film, Pacific Heights.
It's funny that the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack came up. I remember seeing that movie, and I remember getting that soundtrack not long after, but I completely forgot that there was a Soundgarden song on there. I relate them with the single soundtrack with Birth Ritual.
Yeah, that's awesome too.
Yes, that's one of my favorite Soundgarden tracks.
I mean, yeah, I saw the Rusty Cage video, but hearing Birth Ritual was what really turned me on to Soundgarden.
Mm-hmm.
That and the solo song that he has on the single soundtrack, Seasons, was incredible.
Yes.
And little did I know that he was basically a consultant on singles for a lot of, and responsible for getting a lot of the local color in that film. So
the local color being Eddie Vedder and Jeff Ament, and
getting all of his musician friends in there, and like getting clearances to shoot in clubs and things like that.
Gotcha. So let's get
not to mention the cameo, the greatest cameo in movie history.
Oh, the standing there while the windows blow on the car. Yeah.
That's right. Let's get into the discography here. We're going to talk about Soundgarden in the 80s. We need to talk about Soundgarden in the 80s. So chronologically speaking, their first release was the Hunted Down, Nothing to Say Sub Pop single that came out. And then the same year is the Screaming Life EP, which includes those two songs, plus a handful of others. So I want to get your guys' opinion going back and listening to that release. I think the thing that I was looking for is, where this band started with a slightly different lineup. We have to mention that. Ben Shepherd, the bass player, was not in the band at that time. It was Hiro Yamamoto, Rudy. Anytime anybody points out that I might have a problem, I always go and practice ahead of time with the pronunciations. And then, of course, Matt Cameron on drums, who's been the longtime drummer, and Chris Cornell, and I believe it's pronounced Kim Thayil. Is that wrong?
Oh, you're correct.
Okay. There we go. See? So, and this was
a lot of people
by,
try to say Fay Hill. It's Thayil.
Yeah.
And I know that because I asked him directly back in 1990, and he told me how to pronounce it.
Oh, okay.
I didn't
from...
think that was going to be much of an issue. I mean, you look at it and you kind of
people always say Fay Hill. No, they hung out a little bit.
It's a Brett Favre situation, is what it is.
Okay.
And this is pretty much like a combination of all Seattle coming together. You have the photographies by Charles Peterson on the cover, who did amazing photography throughout that era. It was produced by Jack Endino, of course, who was like the guy at Sub Pop who was doing all the production. It came out on Sub Pop, so this is a Sub Pop, to the core. This release. So let's go around the room and actually talk about this release in terms of, are there inklings of what Soundgarden in the 90s was going to become? Can you hear that in this release, in these 6 songs from the CP?
On Screaming Life?
Yeah.
I would pretty much say an emphatic no. To me, it sounded like, definitive Sub Pop in the mid to late 80s, because I couldn't help but think of their peers. That's the word I was looking for. Peers like Green River and Skin Yard and things of that nature. And it was very for me, to my ears, it was very of its time in Seattle in 1987. The other people around the horn could vehemently disagree, but
let's go. Yeah, let's go around the horn about.
That's what I hear.
Thoughts on whether you hear some of the youthful Soundgarden turning into the 90s juggernaut. Anyone have any disagreement of that? Hear something in the playing or in the songwriting?
Well, musically, I found it Hunted Down was probably the closest that they came on that EP to sounding like the future Soundgarden that of the 90s. But it's still way more metal than the stuff that they put out in the 90s was. But it still has that Black Sabbath tuned down riff to it. That was really the only song that I actually found sounded like it. And going back, I actually listened to the live version as well from At the Artist Den. And it sounded a little bit similar, but they sped it up a little bit more. And obviously Chris Cornell had, been able to, by that point, tone his vocals a little bit better. So it was a much cleaner sounding version on The Artist Den than it is off of the Screaming Life album. But that's the one where I hear Soundgarden as we know them today.
Who else wanted to chime in?
You can definitely hear Matt Cameron, I think, punches through on that. Like his style is very unique, and you can kind of hear him almost sounding like the mature drummer that he became. Obviously we know him as in the 90s, but also now, like his playing and chops and feel is nearly identical. I think what's missing is, well, the songs are missing. Chris Cornell, like, you can tell, is not quite sure what he wants to do vocally. There's some moments where like, okay, that makes sense. And there's other moments where he's like shrieking or it's just sounding like a generic, like sub pop alternative rock singer from the late 80s. Probably the thing that's also missing for me is just guitar wise, like you said, Kyle, like you can hear it on Hunted Down. Like that sounds like a Soundgarden riff, but a lot of the other stuff, it's just inconsistent in terms of guitar wise, what they're going to do. And that obviously becomes a huge part of the band, not just Kim Thale, but how they play together is a huge aspect of what they continue to refine over time and really what defines the sound. And then just like some goofy material on here that, they don't do ever again. I can hear also some other influences other than Sabbath, like a band like Voivod to me popped as maybe like something that they would be into on a song like Tears to Forget. There's like a weird alternative metal band from the 80s and 90s that I can imagine them being into. And that comes through a little bit for me on this EP.
I actually heard on Tears to Forget, now that you're mentioning that, almost like a Venom black metal quality to it. And listening to it, I hadn't pulled this EP out in years. So listening to it now, I was a little bit thrown off by some of the vocals on it and how screechy they actually became.
Yes. And first time I saw them, they were actually opening for Voivod. The bill was Prong, Soundgarden, and Voivod. And Prong dominated. Soundgarden was life changing, and then Voivod, we all went and got more beers and left.
I think Voivod's a band for metal musicians.
Yeah,
I was thinking in the time frame, like it wasn't very long ago at the time that they made this that Chris had even stood up from the drums. Like, so in the progression of things, this is early, obviously early, but even early in that sort of configuration of the band that Matt Cameron was pretty new. Chris Cornell had been the drummer. So it's, just in hearing a lot of what you all are kind of pointing out, it's like, they're like fresh at the beginning and sort of making a lot of noise. I remember when this came out though, people just thought they were Martians, like, because people really didn't know what to make of the actual recording. Even the people that knew them pretty well as like a club act and like had been seeing them in town, this recording specifically sort of was a head scratcher for people. Like, people were really into it, but it was, people were unsure, like the live band sounded this way, but this was tricky. It was kind of a tricky leap as a sort of a first effort.
Do you think it had something to do with Endino's production?
I mean, he was producing everybody.
Yeah.
So it sort of, I don't know if it helps or hurts.
Sean, do you think they were ever able to capture on tape what they were like live?
No.
Or get close to it? I mean, that
No.
I've seen 100 bands, 1,000, how many bands? I've never been, it's like Godzilla's in the room when they played. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just volume, it wasn't just crack. There's just something about those four guys that put out a sound. I've never ever experienced anything else like that.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, for me, the record that I always loved the most was Badmotorfinger, for obvious reasons.
Yep.
And it was the closest for me to all of that sort of happening. But the sort of frenetic noise of them live, coupled with all the great playing and everything, it was just, I don't know how you get in a studio and make that happen on tape.
Yeah.
And they never did. Yeah,
No,
totally agree.
I agree.
So this was released in looks like fall of 87, October of 87. And then they would follow this up. Actually, the next release was the FOP EP. Came out in August of 88 before Ultramega OK, which comes out in October of 88. So let's touch on this a little bit, because Jay, you mentioned about them doing some stuff on Screaming Life that they would not do again. Some, I guess you'd say, some experimental or if you want to say goofy things. They also tackle that on the FOP EP.
Let me qualify. I listen to these together. I don't listen to them separate. So I was commenting on this whole collection.
Yeah, so did
gotcha.
I. So did I. I mean, yeah, I listened to the compilation.
Yep.
Essentially, because when everybody became aware of Soundgarden, basically the turning point was when they got nominated for a Grammy for Ultramega OK, and that's when Sub Pop, they had signed A&M and things were starting to really happen. So Sub Pop really just kicked everything into gear in 90 and released the compilation. That's the most common available document of that time.
So here's the thing I didn't know going into this when I was, researching. FOP is a cover of an Ohio Players song. And I just thought it was them screwing around. I never realized that. I don't know why they felt the need to do a dub mix, other than they, wanted to mess around. And then you have a song that Chris Cornell wrote, Kingdom of Come, and then a cover of Swallow My Pride by
Green River,
which ties it into the whole, obviously, scene there. It's what's interesting is you don't see this now as often, but it used to be, I mean, even going back into the 60s, bands would cover their contemporaries. You think about like Jimi Hendrix covering Bob Dylan or other artists that would do contemporary covers, even bands that they were in the same scene with. So they're not goofing around, like they're doing a pretty straightforward cover of that song. In some ways, you might like it better because you might like Chris Cornell better as a singer than Mark Arm, as we've covered Mudhoney on this record, on this podcast.
For that whole era, the Screaming Life and the FOP EP, what really separated Soundgarden from their peers, like in Skin Yard and Green River, and later Mudhoney, was Chris Cornell's voice. With that early Sub Pop material, that was what stood out. Because, I mean, Chris Cornell had that super high squeaky falsetto that none of the other bands had. I think that was the thing that probably got them their initial notoriety in the Seattle scene.
Yeah, that's true. So let me ask you guys, are the Screaming Life and Fop EPs essential for understanding Soundgarden? Or would you recommend people start with Ultramega OK?
Okay, I'll start. I would start with Ultramega OK. Because I thought that particular album had a lot of the elements that the Soundgarden that everybody knows after 1991, they would be able to identify with that one.
I think their value is probably more in the story of their relationship to Seattle, because I think you hear, it sounds similar to other Seattle bands. You've got the Jack Endino piece of it. It has a bit of a sense of humor to it too, which none of their other material after this has. And that's very much, it feels like kind of the spirit of the bands, and the, culture and personality wasn't always so serious. It's having a good sense of humor was, part of it. It just didn't always come across on all the band's music. So I think it's interesting from that standpoint, but it doesn't give you a good, clear idea of what the hell this band's going to do. I agree with Phil on that.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit of an artifact. Although I don't think anybody's pointed out that FOP was produced by Steve Fisk, which is really notable, especially in the scene. Steve Fisk is obviously legendary.
Thus the dub remix. I was going to ask if he did it.
That's it. Yeah.
He did it.
Connect the dots.
Go.
Yeah.
It's all making sense now.
And also explains that it is a little silly and a little bit lighthearted. So that all sort of makes sense in an insular way. But from hey, how do I wrap my head around this band? It's probably a little baffling. So especially to start there.
Well, and through these 80s releases, I think that there's some stuff that they throw on where you're kind of wrapping your head around, what am I hearing on this? Not necessarily always musically, but sometimes lyrically. Some of the choices we'll get to it, but there's some odd things going on. But let's get into the October 88 release. The debut album, Ultramega OK, was released on SST, not Soundgarden, or not Sub Pop, and which of course SST is, by 1988, it's a legendary label at this point. They've released Minutemen and Husker Du and Meat Puppets and Sonic Youth and a ton of influential artists. Does anybody know why they switched from Sub Pop to SST for this release?
Sub Pop ran out of money. Sub Pop had no cash.
Yeah, pretty much up until Nirvana got signed, they were scrapping pennies together to release records.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, and SST had the distribution channels.
Well, that's probably how on the West Coast, they're a West Coast label, right?
Yes.
So that's how Rudy got the tape, was because they probably had good distribution on the West Coast.
Yeah. SST was started, Greg Ginn from Black Flag. That was his label. Yep. It stands for solid state transistors is what SST stands for, because he used to do radio parts on the side. But yeah, there's a Black Flag tie-in there for sure. And it was definitely a West Coast thing in the late 80s. Very West Coast.
But Screaming Trees were on there at the same time too. Yep. The Buzz Factory.
Yeah, Screaming Tree's first record was on SST.
Okay. So, Rudy, I want to ask you. You said that this was the record that you discovered them on. Was it a matter like how did you get the cassette? Like, did you just see it at a store and pick it up? Did you somebody
no,
recommend it?
they were just floating around the job sites. We'd be out there. There'd be a bunch of guys in our 20s framing houses and stuff, and we just always have the radio going. And there was a real buzz around the whole thing coming out of Seattle that started in the late 80s. I mean, it was pre-internet and everything. You got to remember time and place. So you literally were trading around cassettes. And something about Soundgarden is they're so hard and so heavy, but there's always a groove to it. Like Flower has got a groove to it that I've heard that song a million times, probably literally a million times. And I still, when it comes out of that break and goes into that riff, it's just, man, I can't help but nod my head. It's so damn good. And it just, it was just life changing. It's funny too, because they weren't totally happy with that album. That's why it's called Ultramega OK. They weren't happy with the whole thing. They didn't feel like it was 100% of what they were capable of. So they were happy with, I don't know what percentage of it, but that's where the name came from. They said, yeah, some of it's Ultramega and some of it's OK.
That's funny. They're like, Ultramega. I mean, that sets the bar high. Maybe we should bring it down a little bit and just say it's okay. That's funny. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. That's hilarious. So for those of you who maybe got into Soundgarden a little bit later, going back and listening to this, what are your impressions? I know it's hard to compare this to the more polished stuff that's on, obviously Super Unknown and Down on the Upside and whatnot, but I'm curious, folks who have gone back, can you hear more definitively like where Soundgarden was sort of establishing themselves as a very unique combination of this like Sabbath, Zeppelin, 70s rock, but then also integrating other influences like we talked about. I read some reviews that said that, there's some Stooges influence on this record. And I'm just curious, Johnny, like, for example, what do you hear in this record that makes you go, oh, okay, I can see where this is a band that can win a Grammy?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't see it. I don't hear it here. Like, I feel it is Ultramega okay. I still feel like there's nothing here that's extraordinary. I feel it becomes revelatory on Loud Love or Louder Than Love, but I don't feel it yet. To me, it's still very of the scene and of that moment, but there's nothing remarkable about it.
You see, I disagree almost entirely. When I was listening to it, I found so many elements that they used to elevate them to mega success on that record. But then again, I may have been listening to the Jack Endino remix that came out recently. But yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the elements that they would bring to the top. Just in a more claustrophobic package, I suppose. That's the best way I can describe it, because the subsequent records, like starting with Badmotorfinger, like a lot of the elements were there, just in a more spacious arrangement. Because note when they moved to A&M, the albums got significantly longer.
That's true.
Yeah,
this one's only 42 minutes. Louder Than Love is 53, and then I think they get
Super Unknown is 70.
Right. Well, then you're in the CD era.
Yeah.
And all hell breaks loose. Badmotorfinger's 57. So yeah, they did get progressively louder. I felt like listening to this, I got, especially in the guitar playing, and in the rhythm section, like bits and pieces of what musically Soundgarden would sort of perfect with Badmotorfinger, in the sense of like, when you listen, like Jay said, you listen to the riff of Rusty Cage and your mind just kind of warps and you get your head blown back. But they were able to find, Rudy, like you said, these grooves within these like sort of really interesting, 5/4 and 7/8 and weird time signature guitar parts, and you got this amazing drummer Matt Cameron sort of keeping this all together. And I felt like I heard the primordial soup where that was coming from, but they hadn't quite figured out how to make the music match what Cornell was able to do as a singer. Like they're either able to pull off the music, but Cornell isn't like doing something amazing on top of it, or Cornell is doing something really cool, but it's kind of over like a generic metal tritone riff that sounds like Sabbath. And it really, it's a developmental record for them rather than this amazing breakthrough. Then I think you can hear that more on the next record too, but definitely sound like they were still just figuring out who they were as a band on this record to some success.
Yeah,
I agree. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jay, go ahead.
No, Kyle, go ahead.
I was going to say it's a record that's all over the place. You've got the Sabbath, you've got the Zeppelin, you've got the Stooges, you've got even some Black Flag type punk in there with Circle of Power. And I mean, some of these songs you can definitely hear, maybe even going forward and listening to some of the later songs that they put out, like Ty Cobb, Kickstand, Face Pollution. You can hear definitely elements of Circle of Power. And then, you've got a little bit of that sort of bluesy dirge that's Smokestack Lightning that comes across on some of their material. Even I find more some of the bluesier stuff that's on Down on the Upside as opposed to Super Home. But, I definitely wouldn't say that I enjoy this record. It's not an album that I listen to regularly. I definitely have never met anybody that said that this is the best Soundgarden album, but it's definitely showcasing where they were going to go. So.
Well, and I would add too, if you're gonna talk about just this period in the late 80s exclusively, then I think it's impossible to like understate like Hiro Yamamoto in the role that he was playing in the music that is they're not the same band. You could argue that, in a great way, or whatever your tastes are, but they are a dramatically different band with Ben Shepherd than they were with Hiro in many, many, many ways. Some of the schizophrenic nature of like maybe this record is, I think what makes this record cool is that they're so all over the place, and he's a big part of that. And the really interesting timing and the really interesting groove thing that can happen is really all down to him in so many ways. He's an exceedingly important part of this period. I mean, in many, many ways, the guy was not a passive, along for the ride guy in this band in any way, shape, or form. He was very, very, very involved.
So
what about the Jason Everman era?
So I have a question for those of you who have actually seen them in those days. Was Cornell actually playing guitar on stage? Yeah, I figured.
No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen until later.
Yeah,
he did it during Hands All Over. The first time I saw him, he picked it up for Hands All Over. I think, I don't know, it's been 31 years ago, but I think briefly.
Okay.
But he spent most of his time in the audience. So you couldn't.
Yeah, because I had the feeling that all of the guitar work was all Kim. And that could have affected the sound of those early records.
Yeah, I can hear like moments like, and it come together into full songs. So like Flower, All Your Lies, to me, those sound like, okay, I'm getting the connection. Mood for Trouble, Head Injury, but then there's within that all these diversions into other directions, experiments, sometimes, yeah, way too Sabbathy and dirgy. So to me, it's just not as consistent as what would come later. I mean, after that, all the records, even though some are too long or go in places that are, maybe more commercial, they're solid, consistent. Like they know what they're trying to do with the full record. This is the one where it's a little, like we mentioned, it takes left and right turns and goes in further off the script than the ones that precede it. But you can definitely hear some of the, like I even hear something like Spoon Man. To me, I can hear in Flower, just the way that riff sounds and like the way it's constructed. It's like, oh yeah, I can see how we get from that song to this song. Or even like Head Injury, I can hear where you get from Head Injury to Rusty Cage now. I think the bluesy stuff is interesting. In fact, like to me, Smokestack Lightning almost sounded like a Hendrix vibe. Like it has a weird psychedelic bluesy thing going on and a riff that I could definitely hear maybe like a little nod to doing something that's a little Hendrix like.
Well, that whole experimental thing just lent to the excitement around that band. And they were super mysterious too, because you would just get pictures of them. They got this Japanese bass player, this lead guitarist that looks East Indian, this guy that looks like he should be the face man for a hair band is the lead singer, but with all this crazy voice and these crazy lyrics. And then I think it's on the Ultramega where it's got the songs 665 Beyond the Wheel and then 667. It's like, nah, do the math. Oh, 666 is somewhere in the middle there. So they had all this mystery to them too that fed into the whole mystique of it. We would listen to those albums over and over and try to analyze them and break them down and see what, probably more than they had ever intended us to. It was really used to pour over the jacket covers for hours just trying to figure this band out.
Music was fun in that way before the internet. You could just like create your own little world of what it all meant. Yeah.
I miss that.
Mm-hmm. Mystique.
Always thought that it was cool that a song like Incessant Mace got rediscovered later, even in their live sets when they get back together and start to tour there before Chris's passing. That was a song that would sort of regularly show up in sets. Was awesome. Like it was always like, wow, like reaching really far back. And then that's kind of just a wacky song anyway. But I just thought it was cool that they clearly that song had kind of resonated with them in looking back, and they sort of had kind of rescued it and brought it out and had been playing it a lot. I always thought that was cool. Just as far as like this record is concerned, it was one of the songs that survived.
So let's move on to the second album that they released in the 80s, the 1989, September of 89 release, Louder Than Love. This was released, this is their major label, I guess you'd say, debut on A&M Records. It was produced by Terry Date, who is a well-known engineer. Prior to this record, he had worked with Metal Church, Filth Angel, Sir Mix-a-Lot, The Accused, and Dream Theater. So what's interesting is, okay, well, I mean, Sir Mix-a-Lot's the outlier there, but I read some quotes from, like Kim Thayil and stuff, and they were like, well, we're not trying to do metal. Or Cornell said, the band sound is enough for anyone into speed metal or heavy rock, neo metal maybe, which I think is interesting because of the producer that they decided to work with, a metal producer. And it was recorded in Seattle over the span of about 2 months, which I'm always amazed when bands like this get that done so quickly. But it was slapped with a parental advisory sticker, totally due to the song Big Dumb Sex, which was we're trying to remember where I think it was Cornell who said that was basically they were trying to parody glam bands.
Yep.
It's a parody song, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Satire on sex metal, I guess.
Yep. It was a total like piss take on hair metal.
So when I bought that CD, they had this very self-conscious sticker on the front of it that said "Developing Artist Series." So in other words, at some point they're going to start playing screechy leads, and Cornell's going to tease his hair and put on, spandex or something. It's like, don't worry, guys, we'll get him there someday. It was, I've tried to find that online and I haven't been able, but I just distinctly remember this whole, because I took the CD to friends of mine that we were into it. I go, check this out, Developing Artist Series. What are they? Why are you being all self-conscious about this?
So interesting about that song. It's included on the Spaghetti Incident by Guns N' Roses as a medley with T-Rex's Buick McCain. I don't know why. That's very odd. And one other bit of arcane trivia. Kirk Hammett said that after he listened to this album, he wrote the riff to Enter Sandman. So we have this album to thank for that. So let's get into talk with this record a little bit. Listening to this personally is when it clicked for me. Like, now I hear where Badmotorfinger comes from. Like, this is the bridge album where the early stuff that sounds sort of underdeveloped and they're still raw and they're still figuring things out. This is the record where I go, oh, okay, I see where this riff is coming. I see where they're using weird time signatures, like on I Awake, that jumps around all different time signatures in that song. Get on the Snake has a weird time signature. It's like 9/4 or something like that. So I completely hear all the bits and pieces that are going into what I would consider like their, the album that first connects with me and I want to go back to over and over again. So did you guys have a similar experience going back and listening to this?
There was a little bit of backlash when it came out amongst the hardcore, saying they'd gone too mainstream. But that's just, then the same thing happened when Badmotorfinger came out. They go, oh, they went totally mainstream now, dude. I had friends was like, I'm never going to listen to him again, but you'd hear him in their car.
That's crazy. Just wait till you hear Burden in My Hand.
Okay.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's the first time I saw them, they were touring in support of Louder Than Love, and that Ugly Truth is one of the best songs ever written. That song is so good and so heavy. And that I remember listening to it the first time of getting the CD. It was brand new and everybody's excited. And what a great song to start an album off with, man. It is just kicks ass and goes right into Hands All Over. It's awesome. And then Gun, right after that.
Yeah,
that just great trilogy to start an album.
And Ugly Truth makes me think that Cornell has to be playing guitar more at this point, because that whole intro, that song, I mean, the whole build up and first verse, if you don't have two guitars, it doesn't really work. Is that the case? Is this where he really starts to maybe contribute more guitar wise?
Well, at that point he was doing the majority of the writing too. So
yeah, it seems like based on looking at the songwriting credits for this record, it seems like a lot more of it is Cornell's territory. Like Hiro Yamamoto is credited with, I think, 3 songs.
Yeah.
Kim Thayil 2, and the rest is Cornell, which was not the case with the previous records.
Yeah, I'm curious on what other people are thinking of this. Like Kyle, Johnny.
I've listened to this album many times over the years. I love it. There's songs that I listen to more often than not, or more often than others. Sorry. I'm just kind of looking at the CD lineup here. So, Hands All Over is probably one of my favorite Soundgarden songs. It's definitely in my top 5 for sure. Just the way it builds, and then you get that "Don't Touch Me." It's awesome. Get on the Snake is good. I never really enjoyed Big Dumb Sex for quite some time when I was younger, but then, I mean, the older I got, I understood the satire of it and how they were making fun of it. And I mean, maybe that was the point. When I was younger, I just thought it was just a stupid, kind of silly song. But now I actually think it's quite clever. It's quite funny. So.
You had to age up to it.
Absolutely. And I definitely see where you're coming from, that this is the bridge between Ultramega and then Badmotorfinger. Playing those 3 albums back to back, it's almost an entirely different experience from each album to the next. And there's such a difference once Badmotorfinger kicks in that it almost leaves some of this stuff behind. So, yeah.
Johnny, what about you? You were not impressed with Ultramega OK. Is this leaning into your sort of more favorability zone? You're muted.
You hit the nail on the head that this is the perfect bridge record. And I feel like you're starting to really establish what Soundgarden is now on this record. I agree, those first three songs are absolutely incredible. It does get a little indulgent the longer it goes on, but still, it's really, everything is kind of coming together. But the progression from this record to Badmotorfinger cannot be overstated. It is absolutely incredible where they end up just 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a quick turnaround for this band.
Yeah.
This is not a punk band, cranking out 30-minute albums. These are complex songs at this point with all these time changes and whatnot. That takes some time to put those together.
Well,
it was Tool, it would take 10 years.
I'm going to be contrarian here. I found Louder Than Love to be I found it too dirgy. I mean, I guess with having the bigger label, you want to kind of streamline and have some sort of sound there, but it just didn't seem to click enough for me. The tempos were really sludgy and everything else, and I hear a whole lot of Sabbath in almost every song on this record. And it just, I don't know, maybe it just, the longer arrangements and stuff kind of just lost me. Something that they would bring over to Badmotorfinger. They brought everything over to Badmotorfinger, but tightened up the arrangement and kept the song length. So think songs breathed more. I think the songs on Louder Than Love breathed way too much. I mean, but conversely, Matt Cameron sounds amazing on it with all of the stuff that he's playing. I think that's where he really came into fruition with his playing on Louder Than Love.
Interesting. I do agree. This is a little more sludgier. And there's some slower tracks, and there's definitely a heavy, they were heavy, but they were, like you guys mentioned about the Black Flag influence, there was a punk influence, and I feel like that gets quite a bit stripped away on this record. Where
you don't hear a whole lot of punk influence on that particular record,
right?
No,
which is why Hiro's out.
Oh yeah, was he the driver of that sound?
Yeah, he was done. He this was even just making the record with Terry Date, he was already nope, we're not a metal band. We're not this is not who we are. And I don't want to be a part of it. So it's all kind of, again, you can really see it's almost like then they go be the band that he was afraid they would be, in a certain way, much to all the rest of us delight or whatever. But he was out. He was out on the whole thing. Sort of famously so.
Yeah. He went back to school, literally, right?
Yeah,
and he went back to college.
Yeah. This record kind of broke my heart later, growing up, looking back at it. And I have a musician by trade too. And this was the cassette you had, you kicked it around in the car. This is the one you had. and like you know, Badmotorfinger came out or whatever, you got that on CD and you're real careful with it or whatever, but like you know, this one you tossed it everywhere, you had it in your backpack, you like it was all it was scratch, you just had it and then you needed a new copy or whatever. Like this was the one. And you know, I kind of had that experience, you know, going back, you know, getting a little older and listening back to it, and it kind of breaking my heart a little bit. Like it just doesn't quite hold up to the nostalgia of it. You know, barring those amazing 3 first songs and, you know, some other real highlight moments. It just, yeah, I kind of agree with most of you guys there, and that it just didn't. It's not the same listen now, certainly, as it would have been then. Because boy, we were so fired up when that came out, and it was A&M, and it was a huge deal in town, and it was like, and the cover was, you know, the whole thing, you were just psyched. And so I think that the excitement really sort of maybe colored how you really thought about the music.
Well, it was exciting that the bands we love were getting noticed, and then you fast forward a couple of years and you're like, oh, it's the worst thing that ever happened to us, you know. So now everybody's wearing flannel.
Well, and I think it's pretty funny, like, if that particular record came out in '94 and not marketed to alternative genres but to metal genres, it would have been hailed as a classic. Yeah. Like you put that with Pantera and much heavier bands that were on majors, but you know, the thought of getting airplay other than 3 spins on Headbangers Ball was, you know, a pipe dream. A record like Louder Than Love would have been perfect in that scenario, but it came out, you know, 4 or 5 years earlier.
I'm pretty sure Terry Date produced all those other records later too.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, the King's X records and the Pantera records, it's all the same. Yeah, it would fit in very nicely, I think, with those.
Yeah, it would have fit in really nicely in, you know, completely different marketing and that whole kind of thing. I mean, just the fact that they were the first Seattle band to sign to a major, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And
yeah, they were. That was the big one.
Yeah, and you know, being the first, you know, what does the major label do? It's like, okay, let's pair him with this guy that can make the record cheap, because Terry Date wasn't, you know, Terry Date until a few years later, and they made this kind of sludgy metal record that kind of picks up on the second half, but yeah, it just seemed very out of its time.
Well, and what's interesting is that they would go back to Date on Badmotorfinger, but that was with Ben Shepherd on bass,
right?
After a tryout with,
yeah,
I was going to say with a tryout with Jason Everman on tour for Louder Than Love.
Yeah,
which didn't work out.
Don't forget the Forrest Gump of the Seattle scene, Jason Everman. He was in Nirvana. He was in Soundgarden.
Yeah, poor guy.
He went off to be. He's like an Army Ranger. He went into the high end. Yeah, he's a badass.
There's a long profile on or in the New York Times on him.
Yeah, like from like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah, interesting dude.
Well, you see, when Ben Shepherd was brought into the band, the songwriting got tighter. I mean, they kept the arrangements, but they made the hooks tighter. So hence you would have something like Rusty Cage and Outshined, where the music actually like seemed to move forward a little faster, even if the tempos didn't change.
It was funny though. The narrative in town was that they had to dumb it down for him to be in the band, which explained the shorter songs and some of the things that people sort of conveniently pointed to. The perception that he was a limited player compared to everybody else in the band. didn't turn out to be the case. But that was the narrative as it was happening. Was that like, how are they going to play with that guy? That guy can play 4 notes.
Was Soundgarden his first band?
No, he was really young. Like he was like a generation younger. So he had been around, but he was famous for being like the #1 Soundgarden fan. Like he was at all the shows. He was like, again, so like little club kid, who actually really tall little club kid. But and so that was sort of how he was known, is like, well, he probably knows every song and everything. So that's probably pretty easy.
Well, also keep in mind, between Louder Than Love and Badmotorfinger, they were nominated for a Grammy, and that got them a lot of attention just in the industry alone. I mean, it probably got the Hands All Over videos spun on MTV a couple of times, after the fact. And A&M was like, all right, we're going to need something that we could sell a lot easier. And you'd have this new bass player, and the songs he's contributing are tighter, and it just kind of snowballed from there. We need hits, man.
I'd also mention regarding Ben Shepherd, he was pretty young, and the reason why he was not brought in instead of Jason Everman came in is that he just didn't know the songs yet. That's why Jason Everman was brought in. But one of the things they credited him with was alternate tunings, which they had only used basically drop D prior to this, and he started writing riffs with alternate tunings in mind. So he co-wrote Jesus Christ Pose, Slaves and Bulldozers, and then later The Day I Tried to Live, and My Wave, and Pretty Noose, which all feature some sort of alternate tunings.
Well,
so although he was younger, he did have some musicality.
Well, he was a guitar player,
gotcha.
Not a bass player.
He's a guitar player by nature.
Yeah, and he had sort of famously, right at that same time, the Nirvana guys had asked him. He literally tried out for both bands, seemingly right at the same time.
Right.
As to be a guitar player, obviously
because he was friends with Chad Channing, who was in obviously Nirvana for a period. So that's how that happened. So here's a question I'll ask, because we're at our hour mark. Obviously, people now know Soundgarden primarily because of their 90s output, because of the big singles from Super Unknown and Badmotorfinger and Down on the Upside. If you were going to recommend going back to listen to some early Soundgarden, what would you suggest that they go listen to? A curious Soundgarden neophyte might say. Where would you direct them? I'll go around and ask everybody. Johnny, what would be the one that you'd say, hey, this one's not bad? I would suggest you get a good taste.
I don't know. To me, it's not going to be a record. It's more like it's songs. Like for me, it's Nothing to Say, or Hunted Down, Hands All Over. So for me, it's moments in time. It's particular highlights more so than a full run through of a record.
Okay. Kyle, what would you suggest a Soundgarden, young Soundgarden fan at their school of rock? What should they listen to?
I would definitely jump on with Johnny and say that, it'd be a mix. I would make somebody a mix for sure. But I mean, to answer your question, if I was to narrow it down to a straight up album, I would definitely say Louder Than Love is where you want to start, where you want to go. And then work your way back. Gotcha. Phil?
I will have to say Ultramega OK. Mostly because a lot of the elements that are in the successful singles are there on that record, even if the band themselves aren't terribly fond of it. I mean, I could go through the majority of that track listing on that album and then say, oh, okay, well, Incessant could be very reminiscent of 4th of July on Super Unknown. That was the first example that came to mind.
Gotcha.
But a lot of the elements that Soundgarden ultimately displayed on the albums that everybody knows are there on Ultramega OK. Like all the influences are there. And Matt Cameron at that point was really starting to come into his own. Not necessarily that present on Screaming Life and Fop, but definitely you could hear his personality on that record developing.
Yep. Rudy, what do you say?
It's impossible because they just changed so much. And Sean hit it right on the head when Hiro left the band, and that was what he said on his way out the door, is like, we're turning into everything I didn't want us. He had more of a punk rock ethic. There's so much change from album to album. It would be really hard. I'd agree with Johnny, maybe just pick out some individual songs for somebody to listen to or something. But as it progresses and you get into their radio hits and stuff, it's like I commented on the Patreon page, I don't know why Black Hole Sun was a huge hit. That song is awful. And it just, and the fact that so many people know Soundgarden was like, oh yeah, Black Hole Sun. And it's like, a friend of my favorite band is Radiohead.
It's angsty.
I don't understand why Black Hole Sun became almost a standard. It's a modern standard when there are so many other songs on that particular record alone, 4th of July being one of them, that is so much better.
Yeah. And some of their hardest songs. I mean, Pretty Noose is one of the hardest songs. I mean, that's got a beat to it. That song kicks ass, but I have no idea why. So it would be hard to tell somebody to land on a particular album because it's so they change so rapidly and so much over the years. It's really quite an arc.
Gotcha.
I mean,
Sean?
Yeah, I was gonna say I could probably whittle it down to one song. If you were just trying to explain like this period, I'd give somebody Flower. Just listen to Flower, and you probably get most of what you might need to get out of all of it, just kind of encapsulated in the one song. Beyond maybe the first 3 songs on Louder Than Love, but I think that song is a real standout for me of the period.
Yeah, Flower is it's probably, I think I looked at my phone the other day and I think it's my second most played song in my phone, and it never gets old. It's just a perfect song.
That's features Kim Thayil blowing on his strings.
Yep. A lot of people don't know. Yep.
Yeah, he did.
Actually saw them try to recreate that in concert one time. It was hilarious.
Well, I read that, and is it literally him blowing on the strings?
Across the 6th string?
I'm a musician, so I thought maybe that was like a term that they use.
No.
Nope. He's blowing across the strings. Yep.
Yeah.
Just
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Wow.
Newfound respect for that song now.
I'm curious what guitar would pick that up. I mean, I guess it's picking up the vibration. I've seen somebody sing into their JS2 sing into their pickup on an odd 70s Telecaster that had
I've seen that happen too.
Like a mic in what was that, Jay? It had like a
old guitars used to have like pickups were different, so they operated more like microphones, so you could actually like sing into them. They had a microphonic design. So yeah, it was a guitar that had an old style pickup in it that you could actually vocalize into.
Steve Albini does it.
That does not surprise me at all, Johnny.
with shellac.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for spending some of your Wednesday evening helping us go through the 80s life of Soundgarden. This was really cool. I had never spent as much time as with Soundgarden's early stuff as I have over the past week. So it was really cool to hear all this and get all your feedback and thoughts on this, because I think when it's all said and done, I mean, I think these are going to go down as one of the great American hard rock bands of all time. So, and I'm glad we got to talk about them. I do look forward to talking about Dinosaur Jr.'s 80s output someday, because there is some wild stuff in there that we're going to struggle with.
There's a reason why on the poll I chose Dino Jr. I went into one of my lengthy explanations, and that you all love eye roll so much. But I am glad I'm glad they turned to Soundgarden. So
right, I feel like this was more manageable for the first time out.
Right, let's start easy.
Exactly.
Not complaining.
We don't need to start with 7 albums. We can start with 2 albums and then work our way up. We got to build up some calluses on this.
Well, we could do 3 more hours on Soundgarden. I mean, we haven't even gotten into when I saw them in the late 90s and they couldn't stand each other anymore, and Chris couldn't hold a note, and it was just, those were some brutal shows. And then for them to come back, I was doing the math. The last time I saw them live was 10 years ago this year. I can't believe it. But man, they were back, and it was so good to see him. Chris was just ripping it. And it was they were back that like they were in the early 90s.
Yeah, I was quite surprised. Like, he suddenly was able to hit those super high notes again and all of that stuff. Like, hearing him sing Black Rain, which is all falsetto.
Yep.
Like, hearing him be able to sing that again was really, really inspiring.
Yeah, it's a huge loss. I mean, he was always I saw how much they were opening for Danzig of all people. And it was one of those weird mixed shows with a weird mixed crowd, and Chris was threatening to use the microphone stand to regulate things. It was just, there's some real weirdness we could cover in some later episodes.
I need to thank some of the folks that commented. Obviously, a lot of you commented, but for the folks that are not on the podcast, like Scott Holgram, who said, Soundgarden's one of my favorite bands, but like a lot of Soundgarden fans, I'll be managing a Little League game at the time. So I'll just say Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, dust off my hands, and consider it a job well done. Richard Waterman.
Little League game, pshaw.
Yeah, exactly. Richard Waterman, Gavin, Ian McIver, Jeremy Amen, David Gorgos, Tara McCook, Willie Dillon, Eric Peterson, Steve Muzinski, Darren Leach. Thank you all for commenting both on the Soundgarden post as well as the Roundtable vote page. Every month we have a roundtable that our folks over at Patreon vote on. And I'd like to remind you can sign up for Patreon by going to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. It's also where you can check out our weekly box newsletter, which is delivered to your email inbox, covering new releases, music, books, movies related to our coverage of 80s and 90s music. You can sign up at digmeoutpodcast.com. It's also where you can suggest a record by going to the album suggestion link, drop it in there, and it makes it into one of our very contentious polls about whether or not gold records should be included. And people can get into arguments about that. And lastly, if you like what you heard, consider leaving us some positive feedback at Apple Podcasts. We are jumping the charts, by the way, in Turkey. We got notice top 50 podcast in Turkey for music commentary, subset of the main list. So, but the Turks love us. So we're going to head to Turkey soon and do a live broadcast. Jay and I are looking forward to that. I'm sure that they will welcome us with open arms. If they have any Turkish rock, we should know about it. Turkish 90s alternative rock.
We
Put it in
haven't
the
covered
hopper.
that yet.
We have that
That
covered.
would be awesome.
That yet.
Yeah.
Thanks to Johnny, Kyle, Sean, Phil, Rudy for joining us. That's it. I'm tired. For Jay, I'm Tim. We'll be out. Or for Jay, I'm Tim. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
gents.
Damn. Thanks, guys. Drop some
Yeah.
science there. There's a lot of stuff you guys shared that I did not know. That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I have to
Thank you.
confess,
That was
I
a
didn't know if
lot
I
of
was going to
fun.
make it. I had like a like 2:00 this afternoon after I had lunch. I was like, my head was spinning. Like I got nauseous. I thought I was having a heart attack. Like my head
Oh,
was
no.
spinning. I was
Ugh.
nauseous. I was sweating, and then I had chills. And I'm like, "What's going on? Like this is bad." I couldn't stand up. I was just laying on my back. Like the room is like rotating around me.
What
I think I have
happens?
food poisoning.
That's what happens when you listen to too much 80s Soundgarden.
I know. So many time changes. It warped my mind.
It just warps your brain.
I couldn't process the 9/4 time changes. Exactly.
I gotta tell you, Johnny, having that in the background like there when it's spinning, it almost looks like you have a platinum record display.
It's awesome.
It makes me feel really good.
There you go. Now that is that like the super deluxe vinyl of Badmotorfinger, or
No, it's actually, you know what? It's actually a CD box set.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't get those. Oh my God, super deluxe reissues. I mean, I got the Echo of Miles compilation, and I'm more than happy with that.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Well, I didn't get them either, but I get to enjoy them whenever Johnny joins the podcast.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
oh no, you
like,
have
oh,
the
that-
best background
super
ever,
cool.
Johnny.
Like, that's super cool. I'm glad I don't have to find a place in my house to put that.
No. Come visit. When we open the borders again, you can come visit it.
You got it. I'd love to come up.
Where are you again, Johnny?
Toronto.
Okay, I've been wanting to go back to Toronto. I went there in 2005. I want to go back.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
then
Johnny.
again, everything I loved about Toronto is probably gone.
We stole your
It's nice.
baseball team this year.
You can have it.
Yeah. The Blue Jays are playing in Buffalo this year.
Oh boy.
So they're playing at my old stomping grounds, the Pilot Field as it was once known.
They're playing at the
20
AAA stadium?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it was nice, but it's small.
It's small. It's only like 20,000,
Crazy.
25,000 people. And they're not allowing huge, it's New York, so they're tighter on their COVID restrictions. So there's only like 6,000 or 7,000 people allowed at the games. So I'm trying to get tickets for 4th of July weekend to go to see them since they'll be there.
From what I've been told, well, maybe this is just like Manhattan or what have you, that they're planning on fully opening by July 1st.
Oh, okay.
In Massachusetts, they're fully opening on Monday, the 29th. No, sorry. No, it's Sunday, the 29th. Like 10 days from now. And people are freaking out.
Well, we're firing our governor in California, so we're going to get back to normal.
Hey, he just saved you guys. What was that surplus? Like $7.5 billion surplus? That's you got some casino money there. You gotta take that down to Vegas and double that up.
Governor Yoga Pants, that's what we call him.
I don't like his hair. It's too slick. It looks like he looks like Andrew McCarthy in the Brat Pack era.
Wait a minute. Who is this?
Gavin Newsom.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
He's got the slick back hair. I don't care for it.
He's too
I
much.
don't know. I don't know. He gets points for me for, just saying, fuck it. I'll let gay people get married. So, like he just allowed it to happen for a couple of weeks, and I just think he's awesome for that.
No, he was. He used to be pretty, but he's been a world governor. But no, I agree. Yeah, that was back. Yeah, he got the.
He was the mayor of San Francisco.
Yeah, that was when he was mayor, right?
Yeah, he was mayor of San Francisco.
Right.
And that's when they nicknamed him Any Twosome Newsome.
Oh jeez, Any Twosome isn't nice. Yeah, but then again, that was what like 17 years ago or something.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah,
and
Jerry Brown was the governor.
He used to be married to Kimberly Guilfoyle, of all people. A lot of people don't realize that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I have a trouble that does to my brain the same thing that Rusty Cage does.
I'm telling you, it's the